Hello, and welcome to Better Money with the MAIAs, where we speak to the latest winners of the Money Awareness and Inclusion Awards to find out how they're helping other people to become better with money and perhaps learn some useful tips for ourselves too. With 2/3 of the world's population unable to answer very basic questions about money and finance becoming more complex all the time, we need as much help as we can get. I'm Michael Gilmore, co-founder of the MAIAs, and that's exactly why we started the awards. In this episode, I'm speaking with one of the winners of our Best Book Prize, and that's Ana Kresina with Kids Ain't Cheap. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Better Money with the MAIAs, and I'm so happy today to have Ana Kresina with me on the show. She's the winner of this year's Best Book Award for her book, and you see it right behind her, Kids Ain't Cheap. So before I do anything else, I have to do the thing, which one of the reasons I do this podcast is so I can say congratulations to the winners. So congratulations, Anna, for winning Best Book for this year.
Oh, thanks so much. It's such an honor. I was blown away when I found out I won. So thank you so much for choosing my book.
Oh, this is actually, it's interesting. This was one thing I make clear is that you tied for Best Book, which is amazing because it's actually literally the second year in a row we've had tie the Best Book. And although from the accent we all know you're not Australian, we all thought you were because you entered from Australia. And it was the second year in a row where we had tied winners, one from the UK, one from Australia. So we have to watch very closely for this year. If it happens again, I'm actually just going to have to fake it because it will look really suspicious if we have that again. But one of the things I always like to do is I like to ask people how they started on their project. But I think with your book, with your amazing title, Kids Ain't Cheap, I think we kind of know how this project started. But, really give us the details and what led you into doing this.
Yeah, for sure. This project obviously started from having kids. I went on my first parental leave when I had my first child. And when I was on my second one, there was a couple things that I did financially that maybe weren't in the best interest of my family. And the funny thing is that I'm quite financially literate. I work in the financial tech industry. And you would think that I wouldn't make these silly mistakes. But then I realized that there was just really no resources for parents. It's the first time in their life that their expenses go up, but their income goes down. And no one was talking about it. People were talking about finances holistically. You might talk about money as a couple, but you never really, there's very little resources about how finances actually impact mothers specifically, parents, what impact that has on your earning capacity, on your retirement fund, and so forth. So I thought, hey, why isn't anyone talking about this? I had a friend of mine who wrote a book and said, you could write a book on this. I was like, oh yeah, but I don't know. And sure enough, I was on parental leave and decided to just start jotting things down, and it just flew out of me. I knew exactly what I wanted to write in what chapter. I knew what needed to be discussed, and it was a passion project, and that's how Kids Ain't Cheap came to be.
That's wonderful. I mean, as someone, I gotta say, as someone who's written a couple of books myself, when you know exactly what it is you want to do, it just comes. If you try and force it, there's no way, right? But I can tell with yours, yeah, it's exactly that. You knew you could probably have written two, and now you have.
Yes. Yeah. Now I have two books. But the crazy thing about writing during that parental leave stage was my second kid was not a very good sleeper. So I was so sleep deprived. And when I go back and read it, I'm like, oh, I would write things so differently now, having a full night's sleep. But I would wake up in the middle of the night nursing my baby and thinking about what the next part of the book I'm going to write. So it was a very, very interesting time in terms of writing, getting the content, living it all at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's so true that it is one of those subject matters that people have a sort of general idea it's going to cost. But what we've probably all seen is we've seen someone talking in a newspaper article or in a magazine article saying, oh, kids cost 200,000 or 500,000 or $1 million. And it seems like such a random made up number, and it's not specifically there and broken out in exactly all the ways it's going to happen to you. So was that one of the things that really inspired you to sort of get into that and really help people with understanding the nitty gritty of it?
Yeah, I think there's so many aspects of it, right? Because For example, let's start before a family, like people are thinking about a family.
Mm.
There are costs that are associated at that time. I know for myself, I have endometriosis. So if I wanted to start a family, I needed to go and have surgery. And I went through the private system, which costs a lot. A lot of other people have to go through IVF or they're planning for adoption. Those are
Yeah.
costs up front before you have a family, and they can be detrimental, right? Like it's quite expensive to go through those processes. Then after that, there's the planning of whether you want to do public or private healthcare. Here in Australia, a lot of people have to choose between the two, and you're totally right. My accent is Canadian, but living here, it's a slightly different system than what we have in Canada. So just learning that as someone who moved to a different country is also a new learning curve. And we have a lot of people who are immigrants who weren't born in Australia who have to navigate that, and we have that across the world, right? Like everyone is moving to different places and you need to learn new financial systems. So you're planning for the health journey. And then a lot of parents often get like swept away with new baby clothes and the baby furniture. And that can be a big outlay in the beginning, but you can also do it quite cheaply. However, the part that gets thought about the least is how are you going to juggle living on one wage, or if you're a single parent, taking parental leave? How is that going to impact your earning capacity, your employment, your ability to take on new higher paid roles, but then also your retirement? Here in Australia, we have employers who pay into your superannuation, your retirement fund, which can help you down the line. But that's not the case in all countries. But in Australia, a lot of women, because they end up being the primary carer, they end up taking themselves out of the workforce, and that can hugely impact women over the long run. So that's though no one really talks about that stuff. And this is a system, again, like a financial system that's set up that doesn't really account for employees leaving the workforce for a given period of time. And that's the part when you run the numbers, you actually see that women sometimes miss out on around $2 million in their earning capacity and their retirement savings just from having kids. It's a huge amount of money. So that's something that I really wanted to discuss because there's ways to mitigate that, to think about that here in Australia specifically. And then as you move forward, there's all these other costs that come into play, right? Like how much do kids actually cost?
Yeah, exactly. Which is the bit that I mean, that's the bit that tends to be the focus. But even that bit, people, it's such a long list of costs that, people tend not to stack it all up. So it's great to see it all in one place. Plus I think that we wrote a paper at the MAIAs this time last year about the gender gap. But one of the issues that comes up is essentially a tax in many ways, right? Across all the different elements, whether it's work related or cost of things. So you stack on the cost of actual kids on top of that, and it becomes a much bigger number. Have you had reaction from people, that readers, telling you what have they been saying? I mean, that they discovered, what are the things that they didn't think was coming?
Well, I think the biggest surprise was the discussion around the motherhood penalty, which I think you alluded to, which is that oftentimes mothers who take time out of the workforce end up losing out on 5 to 20% of their earning capacity, their income, their retirement savings, whereas fathers, on the other hand, often see a pay bump. So fathers will see a bit of a bonus around 5%. And a lot of that comes down to biases that we see towards men and women, towards mothers and fathers, and also just like within the workspace. So how do we navigate that? Some of that is gender biases, and some of that is just creating policy understanding and supporting parents who want to take parental leave. A lot of the feedback I got from parents, specifically fathers, being like, I want to take more time out. I want to spend time with their kids. And we do see better outcomes for that. For kids and for parents, right? For fathers as well, who want to be in their kids' lives. So it's a bit of that juggle. How do we navigate this as society continues to change, as people need to want to be involved in their kids' lives? So it is an interesting discussion. I think like a lot of times parents are surprised by how expensive kids are. And here in Australia, I think there's no real statistics that actually say the actual number, but it's around $500,000, probably higher with inflation. So it's a huge amount of money because we don't count it for everything. You don't count the fact that, you might now have to run the heater in baby's room during winter or aircon in the summer because that's, it's kind of absorbed in the household costs, or the fact that you might need to upgrade your car because you want it to be safer, or you need more room for car seats. These are small hidden costs that
Yeah.
becomes a part of life that are due to the fact that you've had kids, right?
Yeah. Or the cost of an extra bedroom in Sydney or Melbourne. I mean, that's a crazy amount of money, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not cheap. It ain't cheap at all.
It
So
is.
it adds up. And a lot of parents, I think, also want to make better choices for their kids. So even some of that might be deciding on what school you wanted to send your kid to. That has to do with where you want to live, whether you're going to buy or rent. And there's a lot of decisions that need to be made for your family when it comes to that. Do you want to be in an area that has better public schools? Chances are real estate's going to be higher there. Can you find a rental there, or are you buying? What are the things that you need to choose for your kid? A lot of parents will also say, hey, I want to put my kids in swimming and in dance and in soccer. How do I choose? And all those costs add up. And it's hard because we want to make the best choices for our kids. We want them to have an amazing future. And all of that has to do with finances, but we need to manage our finances as parents first before we can kind of navigate that.
Yeah, I can tell you, you'll be doing new editions of this book for the rest of your life. With my two are 23 and 25, and while they don't live at home and there aren't the kind of those daily costs, there are still costs. It's
Yeah. What
one
are
of them.
some of the biggest surprising costs for you as a parent?
The surprising costs. The thing that really hits you when you calculate it afterwards, so because this is a unique cost, but because we don't live in our home country, we can't send our kids to local school. So international school was the only
Yeah.
choice. And you try not, at the time, you almost try not to add it up,
Yeah.
until it's done. But at the end of it, you go, and so personally being like an investment analyst myself, I had no choice but to PV that just to increase the actual cost, right?
Yeah.
And see
Yeah.
what it
Yeah.
was, the real cost today. And I was like, oh, wow, that's an enormous amount of money. And you just think, yeah, but yeah, it is what it is, right? I mean, they aren't cheap. There's no way they're going to be cheap. And the moment, and I think one of the things that I love about what you're doing with your book is that this is not a book to discourage people from having children. It's because everyone with kids wants to have the best outcomes for their children. But it's a question of knowing what those outcomes cost and can you
Yeah.
do them and how can you do them and what are the ways and how can you budget for it. I mean, I think one of the things that is so important about so many elements of financial literacy. Bring it out in the open so people can actually know, right?
Exactly. I think like one of the biggest costs that parents know are there, and I felt this way as well, is I knew childcare, early
Mm-hmm.
childhood education and care was going
Yeah.
to cost a lot. I know that's a thing. It's one of the highest here in Australia of of some of these countries, and there's subsidies in place, but it's completely
Mm-hmm.
different when you see the equivalent of your rent or of your mortgage
Yeah.
going to childcare. It's a huge amount of money. And so many parents celebrate when their kids finally go to school, especially public school, because that's a cost that that is
Yeah.
no longer there. But the funny thing is research shows that kids cost more as they get older. There's going to be more
Yeah.
food costs, more extracurricular activities. You just might not see it as a big lump sum once a week or, once a month. It's actually here and there scattered across.
So I want to come back to something you said earlier on. Right at the very beginning, you talked about the fact that you were, you good financial literacy yourself,
Yep.
um, and I'd like to know where that comes from
Mhm.
because it's something that I feel like everyone, obviously everyone like us who's working in the financial literacy space tends to be reasonably financially literate, but we've all sort of come at it from a different place in a different way. None of us are born with it, and as we discuss all the time, people in our space, very few of us are taught it at school. So we just have to kind of come on it from our own angle. So I think of it as like there's an aha moment when you kind of go, you didn't know money, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this thing money exists and you can manage it properly. And maybe it's the moment you sort of start down that financially literate track. Did you have that? Can you remember it? Or how did it happen for you?
Yeah, great question. I grew up in an immigrant family. So my family is originally from Croatia. I'm first generation Canadian. I was born in Canada. And because of their frugal ways and living under communism and so forth, I picked up a lot of those traits, right? Like being frugal, in saving 10% of my income or more, never going into debt. These ideas were already instilled in me. But once, and property was always like the big thing that our family talked
Yeah.
about. You can invest in property. Property is really important, but the stock market, that's a whole other story. That's gambling, right? So this was the
Yeah.
idea that I had around money and finances and some of my limiting beliefs, because the stock market investing was for rich people, for white blokes, looking at screens. It wasn't for me. As I at one point then moved to Australia, I wanted to travel the world, adventure. For me, a lot of my life was around saving money to travel, spending it, then saving money to travel, and then doing that again over and over again. And I wanted to live in a different country and check it out. So I went on a working holiday visa to Australia, where the wages are much higher. Coming from Vancouver, the cost of living is really high,
Yeah.
property is really expensive, but the wages are very, very low. So you have a very small difference between income and
Yeah.
expenses. Where in Australia, I could save much more, and I ended up saving a whole bunch more. And thought, what do I do with this? I was still living quite frugally. I still had my
Yeah.
frugal ways, but what do I do with this money? Do I buy property? Do I like start a business? Well, what do I do? And I went down this rabbit hole of finding financial independence, retire early, which is FIRE,
Yeah.
which is a
Yeah.
movement that focuses on essentially living below your means, investing as much as possible. And ideally, if you have 25 times your expenses, you can retire for a long period of time. You can retire early. And this was very appealing to me as someone who was now working in the tech field, making way more money than I was previously, and I could invest the rest. And seeing that money grow was awesome. And being in a new country where you had to learn their new retirement system, the way their taxes worked, everything was new to me. I really kind of dove deep into it and got excited. And at the time, I think I was consuming a lot of American and Canadian information, because I thought I'd go back to Canada, and there wasn't a lot of Australian information when it came around it. So I started blogging. I was like, you know what? I'm going to start blogging, talking about my financial journey. At the time, I was single. I was just doing my own thing, and it just so happened that things evolved. I met my partner. We had a kid, and a fintech company called Perler saw my stuff online, and they said, "Hey, listen, we're new, we're starting out. You're a product manager, you work in tech, you have the skill set that we're looking at. Would you like to consult?" And at that time, I was on parental leave with my first child, and thought, why not? Why not do some consulting on the side? Lo and behold, I ended up going there full time. And that's how I kind of evolved and got into the financial space, right? I ended up kind of working my way there, and then obviously working in fintech. I had to take a bunch of courses here in Australia to talk generally about money. You have to be licensed, so I'm licensed under my company to talk generally about money. So there's those steps kind of moved that way, but yeah, it was completely circumstantial. A lot of it is luck. A lot of it is privilege. A lot of it is just being at the right place at the right time and putting myself out there. So who would have guessed?
I'm intrigued because one of the things you said, so it sounds the thing that many people have to learn when they encounter fire for the first time is frugality, which is
Yes.
interesting because and did you ever? It's not always easy for like the next generation of people who are born in who immigrants to understand that frugality. I have a slightly different one. I wasn't raised by immigrants, but I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandmother was raised by her grandmother. So I kind of like with sort of two generations, I go back to almost like early Victorian times. So that was like the frugality sort of situation there. But some people have those kinds of parents and they really rebel against it and they'll just blow everything because it's like, I was never allowed to spend and now I spend. What do you think was different for you? I mean, was it just like never even thought about it, or was it just like this is the right way? How did you think about it?
This is such a great question, because I think it's important for everyone to really dive deep into their money mindset. Like, where did we come from? Why do we have the beliefs that we do? How did we get there? Like, even though I've been talking about money now for a long time, it's so important. Sometimes I get questions like this where I'm like, I really need to think and reflect. I could have easily been on the other side. You know, when you read books like The Millionaire Next Door, I really could
Hmm.
have been the other side. You know, my family really wanted to provide me with opportunities and things so that I could be better off than they did. And education was a big one. They really focused on education, so that was never a
Hmm.
problem in terms of supporting me there. There was I had a lot of friends who got a lot of free things, a lot of things from their family. And I wouldn't say that I didn't either. Like, I think it's important to acknowledge there is a sense of privilege that has come up with my
Yeah.
upbringing. The big difference for me was I was always a very independent person and very strong-willed. I don't know if that comes across. So I wanted to do my own thing, and I never, I probably didn't follow the path my parents wanted for me. I studied art in university. That was like
Right.
a
Yeah.
passion of mine. I went into fine arts, but I always wanted to have my own money. I wanted to be independent. I wanted to make my own choices. And a big part of that was working for myself, um, being able to travel. That was a huge passion of mine. And that was actually the driver of all the saving and the frugality, because my parents
Right.
weren't going to give me a lot of money to go and backpack through Europe or, you know, hitchhike here or there. Like, they weren't going to do that. I needed to do that. And I needed to do that by working. So for me, it was like, how can I make more money? How can I be more resourceful? Where can I access this? Where can I work so that I can have additional days off of work? Because in Canada and the US, you only get 2 weeks. In Australia, you get a full month, which
Yeah.
is a huge difference. And so coming to Australia, that was like mind blowing to me. It's like, not only do you make more money, but you actually have a full month off where you can take a trip, as opposed to
Yeah.
me having like, oh, I have 2 weeks, which isn't even 2 weeks, it's 10 days. I have 10 days and a
Yeah.
couple weekends, that's that was like the big difference. So I think it goes back to the idea of the fire movement. A lot of those ideas were already instilled in me. It's like, how can I make more money? How can I keep my costs low? How can I build the life that I want? And a lot of that was travel. And then it's just like, how do you build your wealth faster? And that was the answer to that was investing. And I wish someone
Yeah.
told me that earlier. So when I talk to younger people, who are, 18, early 20s, investing, I'm like, oh, you've got it made. So
It's
many
so
of
true,
us,
right?
yeah, so many
It,
of us had to wait later in our life. And sometimes I get people who are in their 50s and 60s and are like, is it too late for me? No, it's not too late. Like, the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago. The second best time is right now. So
yeah.
you better plant your trees for yourself. And even if you just
Yeah.
see a tiny shrub, it's better than nothing.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Yeah. I mean, it is one of those, it is one of the reasons why people often focus when we're talking about financial literacy in schools, they talk about the basics, the budgeting, how to manage, what to do with a credit card, what a mortgage equals, all that kind of stuff, which is like the ground level, I think, the foundations. But if we talk to people about investing and just say, like, just start when you leave school, start with your first paycheck.
Yeah, yeah,
Everyone's going to have, and the thing is, we don't do it. And every country in the world has a pension deficit, pretty much. I
yeah,
mean, every country with a pension has a pension deficit. And I mean, unfortunately, you can't, and the reason governments, sorry, this is not my job to rant on here, but the reason governments don't do it is, of course, you're solving the problem for 50 years' time. You're not
yeah,
solving the
yeah.
problem for 5 years' time. But you're solving those people's problems right there and then, right? You're helping those people with it. Anyway, rant over. Should stop. The thing I wanted to ask you about as well is because you've got readers of your book, and I asked you earlier on about your aha moment. Are you seeing people come to you and saying, "This is the bit of the book that tweaked for me, and I suddenly realized X about money"? What's the sort of feedback you get from them? Because I love seeing that. It's because it's always different from the one that ours, right? We always have it's something different for everyone. So what's the thing that you feel that most people come back to you and say, that bit really hit a nerve for me. It's changing the way I think about money.
Yeah, it's different for everyone. Some
Yeah.
people think it's the money mindset stuff because,
Mm-hmm.
we as individuals think so much about how our parents affected us when it comes to money, whether they were in debt, whether they were frugal, whether they were frivolous, that affects us. But less thought is given to us as parents and what we're teaching our kids. Like, we might think about what we're teaching our kids, but what are they actually picking up from us? How are we
Right.
actually talking about money? What words are we saying? Are we saying, oh, we can't afford that? Or are we saying that's not that's not something that we value at the moment. Like how do we discuss money? So I've gotten a lot of feedback around the money mindset part of my book, which was the first chapter, which I wasn't even going to write. I wrote the whole book. I wrote that chapter last. I was like, how am I missing? Like, I'm missing this piece that is so relevant when it comes to money and parenthood. The other thing is a lot of people want to plan to have their kids, so they want to know what the costs are, so that's really impactful. But then what's the next step? How do you teach your kids? How do you talk to your kids? So I'll get feedback from that. And then there's just some like really simple basic things that no one's talked about from the parental point of view. For example, myself included, I didn't follow the conventional route of getting married, buying a house, having kids. I'm not married. I had a kid and then we bought a house. But some of the things you might forget about within those steps is the fact that if you're on parental leave and you're looking to buy a house, you don't have any money coming in. So your mortgage is going to be based on what income's coming in. And those are just like little small things that you need to think about if you're planning to buy a house while you're on parental leave, for example. So these little small practical tips in the book have been really helpful. Another one here in Australia is taxing when it comes to parents or kids, depending on how you set up your taxes. So I've had feedback on like, oh my gosh, you've saved us thousands of dollars because, we had to think about that ahead of time in terms of how we're setting up the tax structure, for example. So these small little tips are so valuable, can save people lots of money.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing I love about these things is what you just said. I mean, your book, I don't know exactly what it costs, but it's not very expensive. But someone comes back and says that saved me X thousands of dollars. I mean, that's like the best thing you could ever buy, right? I mean, I'm assuming that happens all the time, right? People come back and say that saved me this much money.
Even childcare costs.
Really?
I think that's the other thing. Here in Australia, we have a childcare subsidy, so you get subsidized by the government, but it's based on your activity. So if you're working full time, or if you're volunteering or doing school, there's like a certain number that's allocated to that, and that's 100 hours that you can get within a fortnight, so every 2 weeks.
Right.
Now, the thing is, most childcare centers are open for more than that. So there might be an out-of-pocket that you're paying full price on early childhood education and care, like on those hours. And a lot of parents just had no clue that they were paying their fifth day they were paying fully out of pocket, not being subsidized, because it's such a confusing system that if you don't break it down, you might not realize that you're paying for things. You're just like, oh, I think it's working, until you actually looked at and you're like, oh my gosh, no, I'm not being subsidized for this. I'm actually paying fully out of pocket. So little things like that have been really helpful, I think, to parents being able to kind of plan, how do we, maybe I should adjust my hours. Maybe I should work 4 days a week instead of 5, because that fifth day actually does not make sense for our family.
I'm intrigued by this because I suspect one of the reasons you've been so successful doing this is because you yourself are an immigrant like your parents. Because I think sometimes we're in a system, we're born in a system, we grow in a system, we see other people doing things around us. So we don't really think, oh, I have to get into the weeds of the documentation and the rules and stuff. And we just copy what other people are doing, and they may be getting things wrong. Because one of my regular questions is I talk to people, and because step back a second, we all know that the problem with not understanding money is global, but the solutions are always local, because there's always different systems, different things, right? So I always ask people about what they did, the way they had to think about the cultural group they were working with. Now, obviously, the cultural group you were working with was people about to have kids, so it's really, really narrow. But it sounds like there was an enormous amount of work of understanding the local system in Australia and helping people through that local system. Is that right? I mean, and do you think that your advantage of kind of coming in from outside, whereas maybe a lot of Australians just don't even think about it, it's just like David Foster Wallace said, this is water, right? They just swim in it.
Yeah, great question again. I think that, how do I say this? If you sometimes stay where you grew up, you don't have the ability to grow the way that you do if you've traveled elsewhere or if you've gone somewhere else, because you have a comparison. And similarly, coming to Australia, we have a superannuation here, which is the retirement savings. In Canada, we have RRSP, a registered retirement savings plan. They're different. And it allows me to kind of reflect on what's better in one system, what's worse in the other system. How would you navigate those two? So it kind of allows you to have a more contextual understanding of these different systems. And therefore, it allows you to kind of dive deep into how can I strategize or create this to be a more advantageous system for myself, or at least that's how I think about it. So what is it in Australia that can help me get ahead financially? What are some of the tax breaks or some of the things that I can do to increase my income? Like those are the ways that I kind of think about it, because I have something to compare it to. Like or at least that's how I think. I had my boss actually ask me, he's like, what would you be like if you stayed in Canada? And I was like, I would be a completely different person. It's hard to compare, because here coming to Australia, you don't have like the support, or at least me as an individual, I don't have the support network that I did in Canada. And it forced me to grow, right? It forced me to try to find my own way. Would I have ended up in finance? I don't think so. Who knows? Who knows what I'd be doing? I'd be doing something else. But that's like such an exciting thing to think about, because finances is the same way. We choose our different paths, what work we go into, how much we're making, how do we want to build wealth? Do we want to purchase a property? Do we want to just put our stuff in savings? Do we want to invest? We forge our own path. But the more information we have, the more financial literacy we have, it's easier for us to make those decisions. And at the end of the day, we benefit as a society. The more money we have, the more we can spend, the more we can fuel the economy, the more we can make better opportunities. So I get very excited about teaching other people and helping other people, because I mean, I want everyone to get ahead, right? Like this shouldn't be a secret of how you can build wealth. Like I just wish someone told me about investing when I was 18, right?
100%. That's exactly the reason we do the MAIAs. Is there's so many. I mean, there are so many people around the world who share our view that that's exactly the case. And one of the things I love about financial literacy is no one is fighting each other for space. It's like, well, there's enough work to do.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. It makes doing the MAIAs so much fun, because like no one ever says that person shouldn't have won an award. I should have won it. Everyone says that person's doing brilliant work. I love their work. And then
that's exactly how I felt. Like seeing all the winners, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to consume your information, read your books, check out your work, because we're all trying to do the same thing, right? It's just such an exciting space. There's so much room for all of us.
Yeah, 100%. One of the other reasons we started this, and this is why I asked this question, is I feel like because there's no set text, because we're not taught in school, none of us actually know when we start out doing financial literacy work what the right thing is to do. So I'll just say this: I made a ton of mistakes when I started out, and learned from those. I'm assuming you did too, either in your book, but I think the book is a bad place to start, because obviously you did a multiple number of drafts and edits and changes, and you added a whole chapter at the beginning. So we know you did that. But in your like understanding of maybe of kids in HE, whether it's the book or whether it's the actual practice, what mistakes did you make, and what would you do differently, and how are you learning from those? Because that's what we really want people in financial literacy to learn, is how can people learn from our mistakes, what we do better?
Yeah, this is great. So there's a couple different mistakes that I've made, and then I've heard other people make that I thought are really useful to share. One of mine is like this is a quite privileged mistake that I made, but I did talk about it in my book. It was at a point where I was going on my parental leave for my second time. And at that time I had shares in a company that I was working at, and I sold them. It put me in a new tax bracket, a very high tax bracket. The only time I've ever been in this high tax bracket. Fantastic. Good on me. I've made money quite great. But what that did is that impacted my childcare subsidy. I didn't get any paid parental leave. I had to pay full childcare costs. I had to pay an additional tax that's within super. I didn't know that this would happen, because I didn't think that I was going to fall pregnant and all of this. But what that did essentially was it nullified those financial gains that I made. And, a lot of people can listen to this and be like, oh, of course you should be taxed. Like, you made a lot of money. Yes, of course I should be taxed. But at the end of the day, we want everyone to have better financial outcomes. And so what I did, unfortunately, was I put my family in a worse financial outcome because we were looking to buy a house. And that was the reason why I sold these shares. So because of all those, had it been any other financial year, it wouldn't have impacted me in the way that it did because we were having a kid. So that's a tiny, tiny example, very privileged example. But then there's other examples of people who are like, you know what, I didn't have a proper prenup. Or I didn't have a will, and my partner and my partner passed away. It was very complex to figure out the finances. Or those are some like really simple things that parents forget. Like if you are looking after a little human being, you want to make sure that all the paperwork is right in the case that something happens to you, or if you're partner to your partner, that you have a plan in place. There's a lot of financial abuse that also happens, unfortunately, in families. So making sure that you're in a secure place and you can reach out to people. That's why it was really important to also note that in the book in case people needed resources. We see a lot of that. And especially we see that with parents, especially moms who are taking time out of work, who don't have money coming in, who don't have retirement. Here in Australia, women over the age of 55 are most prone to homelessness, and that's really difficult, right? And poverty. So we want to mitigate that as much as possible.
Yeah, 100%. It was one of the when we started the MAIAs, it was the organization it's in Western Australia that produces Your Toolkit. Entered and got, I think, as a runner-up award. At the time, the concept of like education for financial abuse was something completely alien to me. And you see that and just got, it's one of the things that opens up this idea of you make people financially literate. It can help in so many ways. Just like, this in so many situations, like the concept of financial abuse, preparing for that. But I love the idea. I mean, I'm now thinking about sort of, marital literacy, because it's bizarre. The idea that prenups are often seen as sort of being rather mercenary, but when else do we take a contract from the government and just say, yeah, that'll do, for the most important contract we've potentially signed in our entire life? It's like, yeah, that'll be fine. I mean, people have been signing this for years, right? You should get a lawyer to look this over, right?
And a prenup just gets such a bad rep. But think of it this way. It's like, I love you, you love me, we love each other enough that we're going to try to figure this out in case, it doesn't work out, so that we are both better off or in a good space, instead of us trying to navigate this when we potentially hate each other or hurt by each other or saddened by each other. It's like such a beautiful contract, actually, when you think of it that way. And it should be thought of such.
Yeah, it totally should be. It shouldn't be, we're completely unique individuals, and this 50-year-old, standard boilerplate template that the government just hands out to people. Yeah, we'll sign that because that'll be fine, right?
Well, same with wills. Same with wills, right? It's like, why would you take what the government says is they're going to allocate? Why wouldn't you be like, hey, this is who I want to give what? This is the charity. This is the family. Like, get it done in writing.
There's so many areas on this, right? And I think this is, although you might not think maybe the wills and prenups are legal literacy, but I think they kind of, that always touches onto the financial sides as well. I want to come into another thing, because I want you to talk about I always ask people about what's next, and I can see what's next is right behind you. So tell me about the new book. Where did that come from?
Oh, yeah, great question. So my new book is called How to Not Work Forever, and it does touch upon a little bit about the fire thing we were talking about previously, but it's more of a soft fire, I would say. I do a podcast called The Get Rich Slow Club with my colleague, Natasha Etchman, and we're supported by Perler. So we do this podcast, and we got reached out by a publisher being like, hey, would you guys want to write a book together? And we did. Essentially, what we are trying to do is teach other people that you can build wealth, that you can live a life you love. It doesn't have to be like, giving up your soul to be working for someone. You can find a balance, right? And in the same way that right now I'm working part-time, I have my passion projects on the side. I'm also working, I'm spending time with my family. You can have a bit of a juggle of all of those if you want, but most of that has to do with having your finances in order. And a lot of building wealth is through investing. So it's kind of a beginner's guide to investing while building a life you love at the same time.
That's so important. I read a book for my daughter, the first book I wrote, and it was basically the same idea. It is just, but one of the things that you mainly wanted to kind of put into her mind is it's not money focused. It's actually about get get rid of the money worries, then you can worry about everything else, right? Which
Yeah.
sounds exactly like what you're talking about. It's like just to put, let's get this sorted, and then everything else can start happening, right?
Yeah, exactly. It again, back to I wish I knew this earlier. I can say that a million times, but that's essentially what it is. And now that I'm a bit further in my life, further in my career, further in my financial journey, I can make those choices for myself. Before it was very much squirrel away as much money as possible, try to juggle. Now I've spent it all on travel. Now I have to build it up again. But later in life, hopefully you come to more wealth through time, through income, through some of the different financial avenues that you take, and therefore hopefully you can build a life that you love, and
Yeah,
who doesn't want that?
yeah, right. Well, 100%. One of the other, I'd love to know where you learned the most about financial literacy, because you talk about FIRE. Are there particular people in there that you think people should know about that maybe aren't as well known, or maybe none of them are known to people listening? So who do you think was actually most inspirational for you in that space?
Oh, so good. I think like in the US, everyone knows of Mr. Money Mustache, who is
Yeah,
like the original fire blogger. And that probably
yeah,
kind of opened the doors for me to kind of explore that space. I think originally I was listening to Choose FI, which was a podcast. Here in
oh, yeah,
Australia,
yeah.
there's Aussie Firebug, there's Strong Money Australia. My co-host Tash Invests does a lot of stuff on social media. So everyone's kind of talking about it in a different way. It's just that it
Yeah.
was really hard to find that stuff in Australia at the time. So I had to kind of apply these ideas from the US
Yeah.
to Australia, but now more people are talking about it. Actually, last weekend I was at a fire conference, and
Oh, really?
that was amazing. Yeah, because one of the guys who was running it was this gentleman from Perth who was a plumber, started his own business, built wealth that way, and became financially independent, has no social profile on anything, and was like, I want to put this event together. And everyone's like, are you a scam artist? Like, are you a scammer? And he's like, no, I just am so passionate about talking to other people for them to be able to like retire early or build a life that they love, that I just want to bring people together. And it was magical. People want to learn. Again, there's like a
Yeah.
sense of privilege that comes with the fire community, but it's great that more people are talking about it. That didn't exist 10 years ago, let alone 20 years
I,
ago.
I'd agree. I think what's interesting is I get this sense. I'm not part of that community, but there was a sense, like maybe 5, 6 years ago, where the kind of popular in the popular imagination it had kind of gone too far. It was
Mm.
all people talking about either, sorry to use like buzzwords, but lean fire or fat fire or all these kind of different
Mhm.
things, right? Where it was out of the realms of a normal person. And I like what you talked about, like soft fire, which
Yeah.
sounds like it's that achievable fire, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is what the lessons still apply, right? It's just
Yeah.
like slightly different numbers, slightly different ratios, and it still applies, right? Do you feel like the movement is reaching that kind of point where there's enough people doing it, that there's enough sort of variations where someone's prepared to say, I'm happy to retire in 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. It doesn't need to be five. It doesn't need to
Yeah.
be,
Yeah.
full Mr. Money mustache, right?
Yeah, yeah, I do think so, and I think that's something that I often joke around about. I was like, oh, if I didn't have kids, I would have fired by now, right? Like I would have been financially independent. I wouldn't have to
Yeah.
work. But the flip side of that is, I don't regret anything. I don't regret spending that money on travel when I was in my 20s. Yes, I wish I invested, but I do not regret that, because that built so much of who I am, my values, my ideologies, my experiences. And similarly now, it's yes, I could be spending 7 days a week with my kids and not work at all, but that also wouldn't make me the best parent or the best partner or the best individual, because I know that I need a balance in my life. And in a way, like that soft fire, the ability to choose your life, find a bit of a balance, build a life you love, is really, I think, what most people want. At the end of the day, so many people who do reach financial independence don't want to leave their job. They just want to maybe work less or work more on their passion projects. So how do we facilitate that for more people?
Yeah, 100%. That's wonderful. This has been so interesting. I'm going to now, I've got my last two questions. They kind of come together. The one is like the one obvious one that we should ask in a financial issue, which is your top tip about money. But the second question is exactly the same question. It's a money tip, but it's if someone comes to you and says, I want to tip out how to talk to people about money. I've got to talk to my kid. I've got to talk to the class. I've got to talk to my dad, or whoever it is. What tip do you give them if someone says to you, okay, you're an expert on talking to people about money. How should I do that? So there's it. So what's just purely about money and then also talking to people about money? What are your two tips?
You know, it's funny when you asked what's your top tip about money, it would be to talk about money, to be open about money, to be transparent about money. I literally, that was what I was going to say, just to talk more about money, to remove the stigma, the taboos around money, because it was not socially acceptable when I was younger, or even now, it's not as socially acceptable to be like, hey, what's your income? What's your wage? How much did your house cost? How much mortgage do you have? What are you planning on spending on your holiday? Those are taboo conversations. But the more we can talk, the more we can learn from each other, the more we can inspire, the more information we have to arm ourselves to make better decisions. So that would be my first answer.
Have you answered them both together, or are you going
No, that was actually the answer to the first question. Okay. That was literally what I thought when you said the first question. It just so happens that it so beautifully ties into the second one, which is how do you talk about money? And that part can be harder. I get questions all the time. How do I get my partner excited about money? How do I talk to my kids about money? And some of that all falls into the same category of, you know, be open and transparent, be non-judgmental. Don't push it on someone. We all learn differently. So you might learn from podcasts and reading books, but your partner might not. So maybe your partner is more goal focused and it's easier to talk about goals and then breaking those numbers down and actually seeing whether it's achievable. Maybe it's through osmosis. Maybe it's you accidentally playing a podcast or watching a YouTube video on finances and they're like picking up bits and pieces. Finding how people learn is really important in being able to talk about money. And similarly, I think for kids, which is the big one I get asked all the time, and it depends on the age of your kid, but making it fun, making it open, also allowing them to bring value and create value. And when they're younger, that could be something like selling bracelets or having a lemonade stand, whatever it might be, because then they feel empowered. They're learning skills to sell, to make money, to do math, customer service. They're little entrepreneurs. They want to do that. They want to feel powerful and impactful, I should say. And so giving them those skills is such a great way to teach them about money. I already have ideas of what I'm going to do with my kids when they're older, and I've heard other parents do this, so I know that I'm on the right path, which is also giving them, for example, a budget. Here's your budget. You can buy your school uniform or your books or whatever it might be, but you have to choose how you want to spend that money. At the end of the day, they're going to make some good choices and some bad choices, but you can talk about them in a very non-judgmental way, in a very open way, in a very safe way, because you're still the parent, right? You want to guide them to make those right choices, but they need to fail along the way. They need to make those wrong choices so that you can discuss them in a safe space. So
that's 100% right. Because
talking about money.
But also I think one of those things is as well, which you kind of you're saying is that sort of between the lines is actually, and this is so important, that conversations about money are never one and done. Like you know, it's got to be repeated and reiterated and iterated, and because sometimes that's just reminders, but sometimes it's also what you try first time doesn't work. It's not their fault. It's not your fault. You try something else along the line, then try something else, and then try something else, and that's the way. That's wonderful. I also wanted to come back because I mean, we mentioned right at the beginning you tied for best book with Vicky Reynal. Now, this is not to plug her book, but it's actually just talk about when you're talking about money being taboo. The whole point to her book was she's actually trying to change the psychotherapist world because she says it's the last taboo in therapy. Therapists won't talk about money. They'll talk about sex. They'll talk about your relationships. They'll talk about everything else. There are no taboos. As she said, there is. There's money, and they will not talk about it. And so that's one of the points of her book. And that's how much a taboo it is. And I think that comes to what you were saying is talk about it. which is wonderful.
Because it's rooted in our values. It's rooted in our self-worth. It's rooted in our mindset of what our parents taught us, what we've learned, how we compare ourselves to our colleagues. So money can be such a loaded conversation for so many people. And even now, I'm overcoming certain money, beliefs that I have. Why do I feel X, Y, Z? We're going to have that for the rest of our lives. But the more we talk about it, the better off we'll all be.
Wonderful. That's the perfect place to finish it. So in which case, I'm going to say what I said right at the beginning. The whole reason for doing this is to say congratulations. So really well done on winning the prize. And congratulations on your work. Congratulations on the book and everything you're doing. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. And thank you for the award. I'm very excited.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Better Money with the MAIAs. If you found it useful and would like to learn more from other winners of the MAIA Awards, please subscribe to this podcast wherever is easiest for you. You can also visit our website, which is maiawards.org, or follow the Money Awareness and Inclusion Awards on LinkedIn and other social media. Thank you, and we hope you'll join us again soon.